Does it matter on which day we worship God? Did it matter to Jesus Christ? Does the Bible give any evidence on what day Christians should worship God? If you turn with me to Mark chapter 2, there is an account here that is rather surprising to many because it calls Jesus Christ by a title, and we'll get to that as we go through. There was a question about the Sabbath day. In verse 23 of Mark 2, it happened that he went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. And as they went, the disciples began to pluck the heads of grain. So you can picture the event. Christ and his disciples are traveling from one place to another, no doubt, to meet with people, teach, and discuss the truth. And as they went through, the disciples grabbed some of these heads of grain off probably the wheat shocks, or maybe it was the barley, and they probably rubbed them together and blew the chaff off and popped the wheat into their mouth. And the Pharisees were upset with that. Verse 24, the Pharisees said to him, "Look, why do they do what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" What did they say they were doing? They felt that the disciples were working on the Sabbath. They felt the disciples were harvesting on the Sabbath. What we'll come to find is that the Pharisees had put such great restrictions around the Sabbath that they were doing being far more restricted than God ever was. They considered this work, which it really wasn't work at all. So Christ said to them in verse 25, "Have you never read what David did when he was in need and hungry, he and those with him, how he went into the house of God in the days of Abiathar the high priest and ate the showbread, which is not lawful to eat except for the priests, and also gave some to those who were with them?" You could look back into the Old Testament for that story. David was fleeing for his life. He makes a stop at the temple or the tabernacle and he asks, "Can you help us?" And the priest actually gives David the showbread. Now, normally the showbread sat there on the altar for a few days and then was taken off and was only allowed to be eaten by the priests. But in this case, the human need far outweighed that regulation of not anyone eating this bread but the priests. So Christ is showing sometimes human need overrides some of the basic issues, and that was what was going on here. They had to eat as they traveled, and they were not harvesting. It wasn't that kind of work that they were doing. They were grabbing a little snack as they went along. So Christ was showing that you've made the Sabbath a burden. Now, he never said you shouldn't keep the Sabbath. In fact, verse 27, he says to them, "The Sabbath was made for man." You can look back in Genesis chapter 1, Genesis chapter 2. God created the Sabbath for humans to rest. In fact, God himself rested on the Sabbath to set us an example of rest on God's Sabbath day, that holy time. So the Sabbath was made for man, Christ says, not man for the Sabbath. God didn't create this holy time and then say, well, it's so holy, I need to create something to keep it. It was the other way around. God created man and said, you know what? They need a day to rest. They need that 24-hour period of holy time to rest. So the Sabbath was made for man. And then Christ makes even a more stunning statement. Therefore, the Son of Man, meaning Christ himself, is also Lord of the Sabbath. He's not Lord of Sunday in the same way, or Tuesday or Wednesday or Friday. He is Lord of the Sabbath day. So we understand very clearly from Christ's example, it does matter which day we worship God on. There is biblical evidence to show that we need to be keeping the Sabbath just as Jesus Christ did.